皆さん、こんにちは、こんばんは。今日は、ご参加いただきましてありがとうございます。今日はですね、11月に、エジプトで開催された、気候変動の国際会議、COP27、をテーマにですね、FOE のネットワークに、のメンバーに、COP27 について、気候正義について、いろいろとお話を聞きたいと思います。COP、というのは、気候変動対策について、各国の政府代表団が、2週間、程度議論を行う、場でありますが、そこでの決定や議論というのは各国の気候変動対策に、影響を及ぼします。また、政府代表団だけではなく、私たちのような、NGO、ですとか多くの、市民社会のメンバーが参加し、どのような、議論が行われているのかを、ウォッチしたり、政策提言、やアクションなど、市民の声を届ける活動も、しています。また、メディアや多くの企業関係者も、COP には、参加しています。今日は、先月開催された COP27 にですね、参加した FOE の、メンバーから、COP で何が起きたのか、それぞれにとって重要な課題は何か、今後何が必要なのか、といったところを中心にですね、お話をして、もらおうと思います。参加者の皆さんにもですね、ぜひ、質疑応答、等、できればと思っていますので、3人のお話の後にですね、後半になりますが、ぜひ、コメントや質問、お寄せいただければと思います。今日の、イベントのですね、主催は FOE ジャパンなんですけれども、FOE ジャパンは FOE インターナショナルという、世界最大の草の根環境団体のネットワークに、参加しています。FOE インターナショナルには、73カ国の、メンバー団体が、加盟しています。FOE ジャパン、ジャパンの方はですね、1980年に設立され、当時は、地球の友という名前で、活動していました。英語にしてしまうとフレンド・オブ・ジャスで同じなんですけれども、今日の、登壇してくださる3名のメンバーも FOE のメンバー団体で、活動をされています。で、私たち、FOE ジャパンも、その他の FOE のメンバー団体も、気候変動だけではなく、生物多様性や森林保全、原発などのエネルギー問題、人権、経済、正義といったさまざまな、分野に、取り組んでいます。で、今日は、この3名、に、登壇いただくんですけれども、まず最初の、登壇者は FOE アフリカのメンバーでナイジェリア出身の、ババワリ、オブヤンジュに話していただきます。今回の COP27 はエジプトでの開催、つまりアフリカ大陸での、開催だったわけなんですが、過去数回の COP というのは連続して欧州の開催でもありました。またアフリカでの開催というのは、最後が2016年のモロッコだったかなと思います。アフリカでの開催ということに、どのような意味があったのか、COP に期待していたことや達成されたこと、その他重要だと思うテーマについて、ワリに話してもらいます。では、ワリよろしくお願いします。
Good morning. I hope you can see me. I hope you can hear me clearly. I will try to speak as slowly as I can so the interpreters can follow me in the conversation. I want to say thank you to Friends of the Earth Asia Pacific, specifically Friends of the Earth Japan, for this invitation to join this session to share about the experience from COP27. My name is Babawale Obayanju. Ayumi made a very good way to pronounce my name properly, and I clap for her. It shows that we have been together for a while, and so she can pronounce my name very well now, and I can pronounce her name also very well. Yes, I'm from Nigeria. I'm from Friends of the Earth Nigeria, Environmental Rights Action, and the Nigerian member of the Friends of the Earth International. So for the conversation on COP27, initially there was this talk around that because the COP is holding on an African soil again for the 5th time or so, they called it the African COP, and many people decided to target the African COP. But for us in Africa, we do not see it as an African COP, we see it as a COP happening on the African soil. Because we saw that as a ploy from those in government, the corporations, the guys who actually are causing the climate catastrophe we have been faced with across the world, and especially in Africa and other developing nations, that they were using or looking for an opportunity to shift blame on Africa if the COP fails. Because calling it an African COP would mean that decisions that were taken here that would impact on the peoples of the world, if negative decisions were taken and the impact becomes negative, they're going to shift the blame on Africa. That when the COP came to the African continent, you guys did not push or ensure that a positive outcome was made or reached from your continent on issues that pertain to you. So for us, we did not see this as an African COP. We just saw it as a COP happening on the African continent. So going to the COP this year, I honestly was not expecting too much. And I made that clear at various points or various sessions that I had the opportunity to state it. Because from the previous COP, I think I started attending COP from the COP that held first in Durban, South Africa. That was 2011. That was the first COP I attended. And from that COP till this one that held in Egypt, there has not been so serious positive outcomes that would benefit Mother Earth and the beings living on Mother Earth. What I've seen over the years is that the COP space has become a space for trade, for business. And like Nimo Bassi rightly put it, he said the COP has become a trade fair where countries come to shop for businesses, big businesses come to look for vulnerable countries or opportunities that they can swap upon and benefit more profit for their companies. And the global north, who everyone signs, everyone has put the blame on for bearing the historical responsibility for the climate crisis being caused in the world today, also come to the COP to shift the goalpost of action. So I wasn't expecting something too new from that, but I only came to the COP with the hopes that despite the struggle, despite the fight, I will be able to get 1 or 2 victory outcomes from the COP. And I'm glad to say, even if it's an empty horse, we got 1 or 2 victories. And that for me, it made me very happy and it gave me strength to be able to join the fight and continue on the fight. And that victory we got was around the loss and damage finance facility that was created separately from the adaptation and mitigation fund that has been running for many years now. So that for us, for me, I see it as a victory and I see it as a plus. Then secondly, this COP for me also re-echoed one thing, that the issue of solidarity that keeps us going as CSOs, community folks from the developing world, from the global north, all of us cooperating to make sure that we have a definite solution to the climate crisis was strengthened at this COP. Before this COP, I think this is one of the first COPs in the years I've participated in the COPs that we've had serious discussions, conversations before the COP started for the year. Before this year's COP27 that held in Egypt, many groups across the world all had several conversations. And one of the points that we hinged upon that we are taking to the COP this year was to make sure that the issue of loss and damage was not expunged from the text of the COP. Then two, we also clamored that we all made a decision that as we are going to the COP, we must fight and push that a finance facility separate from mitigation and adaptation for loss and damage be created. And many groups went to the COP with this mindset. And I think and I believe that because we were united in the front, we were united on a case, we are able to make sure that is possible. What this tells me is when CSOs, developing communities around the world come together in unity on a cause, nothing is impossible for us. So that is one of the lessons I gained from COP27. I also was able, at least after the pandemic, to meet with comrades. And you know, it's a different feeling when we are together physically than being online or virtually. Coming together to see that comrades have not lost strength or lost steam or lost hope in this fight for a just climate, for a just world, for a world that is habitable for us, gave me strength. It gave me hope that the change that we seek is still possible. The third thing that we took to the COP came out from the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. For us in Africa, at Glasgow, we saw the UK government and the governments of the world pushing that for the first time in a long time, they introduced the word coal, phasing out coal in that document at Glasgow. And part of the decisions there were that there should be no further extraction and then blah, blah, blah. And the list went on and on. But shockingly to see, when this war began, Europe, who initially were of the opinion that there should be no further extraction, turned their back and ran to Africa to start demanding for more gas fields to be open. So with this invasion that happened in Ukraine by Russia, we saw the influx of many European countries, many big oil firms coming to Africa, beginning to pressure our government. And our government, sadly, many began to dance to the tune because of the greed for the financial benefits that might result from it. So what we saw over time was that Africa united in a front before the COP. We made petitions. We did protests. We wrote letters to African Union, to ECOWAS, to the COP, and to several important organizations demanding that we do not want gas to be extracted from the continent of Africa. Why is that so? Science have already said that for us to be able to maintain this well below 1.5 degree temperature rise that we are fighting for, no new oil field should be open, no new gas, no new oil project should be established anywhere in the world. And now we see that if this push for gas happens in Africa, Africa is already burning. At the present, the current state of the temperature rise in the world, around 1.1, 1.2, Africa is already experiencing 2.0, 2.3 degree warming here. Before the COP, we saw the several devastating impacts that the climate crisis has caused around South Africa, in Nigeria, Mozambique, the list goes on and on. We experience flash floods, dangerous impact from the climate crisis. So Africans united and said, we do not want gas to be exploited on the African continent. And we took that message to the COP. Whether we got victory or not, we are not sure. But one thing we know is that we have re-echoed our position that we do not want new oil fields to be opened up. We do not want gas to be extracted on the continent of Africa. And we are still pushing for this, and we'll keep pushing for this until we get the victory we seek. So, so the other thing about the COP, the fourth thing I think I will round up with that, is for us at Friends of the Earth. Many people have said that why do we keep going to the COP? We see the COP as one of the avenues or arena of struggle. to push forth our points and to make sure that the people's voices are heard and that the solutions we are profiling to the climate crisis is put in the document and implemented. So for us going to the COP every year, many have also said that you cannot use the master's tool to solve the master's problem. But for us, we see that even in the master's tool, as long as it's a human tool, there would be a loophole. We are looking at the ways and opportunity we can use that master's tool to cause a change for our world positively. We want a just environment. We want a just energy transition to happen. And if we do not go to the COP space to make our voices heard or to make our positions known, who will do it for us? The big corporations will go there and have a field day and do what they like. But with us being there, we see this as a way, as an avenue to mount pressure and ensure that the positions we have put in place are implemented. Although not all that we have said is being implemented, we see them gradually coming into play. And we are hopeful that as long as we continue in the struggle together, victory is possible. So I'm just giving us this hope because I know from the COP, many bad things happen. Many bad decisions were made that are going to impact on the world negatively. But for me, I choose to see the ray of hope that because some little changes can happen from this COP, I believe that together we'll keep fighting until victory is gotten. So I will stop there for now. If any question comes up, you can take it further. Thank you very much for your time.
素晴らしいお話、本当にありがとうございました。さまざまな要素が本当に詰まっていたと思います。希望をどこに見出しているのかという話もすごく力強かったです。あまりCOP の議論を追われていない方にですね、このロス&ダメージ、損失と被害というのがですね、気候変動による損失と被害というテーマとして、長年ですね、いわゆる途上国側から、議論を求めてきた、テーマであるんですね。気候変動対策上、いわゆる緩和、ミティゲーション、温室効果ガスを減らしていくこと、そして、適応、すでに、現れている変化に適応していく、アダプテーションというのがありますが、この、ロス&ダメージ、損失と被害ということは、長年、主に先進国がですね、議論を避けてきたところでもあります。そこについて、進展があったということも一つ、ワリーさんからお話がありました。2番目のスピーカーは FOE アジア太平洋のメンバーで、バングラディッシュ出身のバリーシュ・チャドリです。ちゃんと発音できてますかね。今回の COP では先ほども出てきたように損失と被害、ロス&ダメージということが注目されました。バリー氏もこのテーマについて詳しいですし、今回の COP について期待していたことや達成されたこと、その他重要だと思うテーマについて共有をしてもらいます。ではよろしくお願いします。
Thank you, Ayumi, and also thank you to FOE Japan for putting together this conversation. I think this was my second COP. I was in Glasgow last year, and that was my first, and Egypt was my second. And I think for me personally, this was more of an optimistic COP than usual. I think it's important to recognize, as Wale was saying, that COP is, it's the master's tools, and to fight the system from within is a very difficult task. But at the same time, I think COP is an important platform for us in civil society because it's a chance to meet the negotiators, to meet the people who are deciding the policies that are supposed to save us from the climate crisis. Whether they design effective policy or not is a very different story. But it's an important place to have our say. And it's not just us that go there, it's also the opposite side, the fossil fuel companies, the geoengineering firms, the carbon traders, all these people are also there trying to influence the policy. So that's why it's especially important that we as civil society attend in strong numbers and show a big unity in this space. I think the other thing to remember is that the negotiators are also human. They are people, even though sometimes we forget that. And as a result, we can talk to them. You can actually influence them on a personal level. I think that was one of the experiences I had this time at COP, is actually meeting the negotiators and discussing with them over getting a coffee with them and talking about what's happening and giving them ideas so that they can represent our demands as civil society in the actual UN plenary halls. As Ayumi said, I focused on loss and damage primarily at this COP, and I'll just start by telling you what loss and damage is. The very short form definition of it is loss and damage are the losses and damages that are already happening from climate change. These are not the things that we think will happen in 2100, in 2050, in 100 years from now, whatever. This is things that are already happening, the losses that we are already facing, whether that is loss of biodiversity, loss of property, loss of finance, also non-economic losses, loss of culture, loss of language that are being directly impacted due to climate change. So it's very broad, but the main problem coming into this COP was that we have never had financing through the UN mechanism for this loss and damage. We have had financing for the mitigation, we have had financing for the adaptation. It's never been enough financing, but we have had some mechanism for that, but we have never had it for loss and damage. Just this year, in my region, in Bangladesh and in South Asia, we have seen historic floods. I have personally have been to areas where they have told me that they have never seen floods like the ones we have experienced this year in 100 years. The village elders have never seen water in the places where the floods came. In Pakistan, for example, there were catastrophic floods this year, causing billions of dollars in damage and causing millions of people to become displaced. So these are no longer hypotheticals, but these are the things that we every year in this part of the world are dealing with. The fund it's an interesting story because we did not actually think that we would get this fund, I think. I think a lot of people, especially me, I'm a bit pessimistic. I did not think we would get this fund this year. But it was already considered a victory when, before COP, we found out that loss and damage would, for the first time, be on the agenda for the COP. So I think people already thought that was a big victory because we had been pushing for that for 30 years. It was a very topsy-turvy ride full of a lot of back and forth. But we finally, in the end, have a decision that there will be a fund for loss and damage that was established in Sharm el-Sheikh. And excuse me, over the next year or so, we will see more development about what this fund will look like, who will be paying this fund, who will be running this fund, and how we will actually get that money to the people who need it the most. But I think the important thing about this fund and the way it came to be is that it was a real show of solidarity and unity. And that's not just from the civil society who every day were outside the meeting rooms screaming and shouting for this fund. They were saying, pay up for loss and damage every single day. We had protests, we had speakers, we had people saying this. But also from within. So the 134 countries that make up the G77 plus China negotiating bloc, which is the main bloc of developing countries in the UNFCCC, they stayed united throughout this process. Usually what happens is they start off very united, but then eventually some differences emerge and they fall apart. But this was an issue that every single country was very united on, and every single country fought very hard, heavily for. And the flip side of that was there were a few countries who were trying to block the fund, and they were trying to block the fund because loss and damage as a concept is very interesting because it brings about the question of compensation. Who is responsible for the climate crisis and who owes for the loss and damages? So the main reason why a lot of countries oppose talking about loss and damage and oppose the financing of loss and damage is because they don't want to admit responsibility and they don't want to admit, more importantly, liability. So this fund has come about, but it is with the disclaimer that this is not legal or liability, and this is not quote unquote responsibility on the part of the developed nations who have committed the most emissions to cause the climate crisis. However, you have to take the win where you get the win. So this is obviously a good thing, but this is an empty fund right now. It's just a statement that we will do this. But how we will do this, who will do this, these things are yet to be determined. So for us as civil society, the real work starts now, because we have to keep pushing this issue for the next year, for the next 2 years, however long it really takes to get the money to flow to the people, the most vulnerable and marginalized people who really need this the most. I think the other thing, so this was obviously the headline achievement of this COP. Everyone went home feeling very good about themselves because of this issue. But I think for me, the other very optimistic thing that I saw at COP27 was the real integration of human rights in the climate activism sphere. I think obviously we know that climate change is such a big human rights concern, but I think those connections have never been as strong as they are today. When I first started working on climate change and thinking about just transitions and things, this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, the legal framework around human rights and climate change was very underdeveloped. And as a result, a lot of the activism was very siloed. They were very separate. Human rights people didn't really know how to talk about climate change, and climate change people didn't really know how to talk about human rights. But one of the very interesting things that I saw in Egypt was the climate activists really engaging with human rights, talking about why things like freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech are so important in our fight against the climate crisis, as well as human rights people really understanding why mitigation, loss and damage, and all of the jargon that we climate people use are so important in their fight for human rights as well. And I think that if anything gives me, hope, it's that we saw that connection really take place and really be strong. And I hope that, we can continue that moving forward. We had so many amazing protests in very difficult circumstances because Egypt is not the easiest country to have protests and have, freedom of speech to say and think about human rights. But we saw such an amazing movement come together. And obviously it was, I think, we have to say that it was very much led by our African colleagues and comrades, because they have faced this oppression and persecution. It's very easy for a lot of people to come into these countries, do their work for 2 weeks and leave, and not think about what's happening outside of that UN bubble. But our comrades in Africa really kept us grounded and reminded us, that we are all in this together, that there is no climate justice without human rights. There's no climate justice without justice. And I think that was a very important part of COP for me. And I hope that, next year we're going to another similar country where there's not a lot of freedoms in the UAE, and I hope we will be able to do that again. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。Thank you so much, Barish. たくさんのまた重要なテーマをお話ししていただきました。ワリーに続けてですね、ロス&ダメージ、損失と被害についての話も詳しくしてもらいました。ファンド、基金が立ち上がった一方でですね、まだそれに誰が資金拠出をどのようにしていくのか、そういった議論はですね、今後の私たちの戦いでもあるわけです。最初のワリーの話でも、欧州中心にですね、アフリカでの化石燃料開発、特にガスに関する開発のガスプッシュがあるという話もありました。日本政府もそうですけれども、たくさんのお金を化石燃料事業に投じている一方でですね、必要なところにはお金がまだまだ投じられていないと。私もCOP の現場で市民社会がですね、クライメットレパレーション、気候債務の返還ということで、アクションをしているところ、にも参加しましたし、そういった声も聞きました。本当にですね、今後の、次の COP、そしてこれからの、各国での、提言や活動で、いかに、先進国の、気候変動に対する歴史的任を果たさせていくかということがですね、特に日本にいる私たちにとって重要になってくるかなと思います。また、人権のテーマっていうのは次に話してもらうディプティ、にもぜひ聞いてみたいところなんですが、今回の COP 本当に、いつも以上に市民社会への制約、大きい COP でした。いつもは気候マーチが街でですね大きいのがあるんですが、今回はそれもなかったということです。人権と気候正義、本当に重要なテーマだと思います。今日のゲストの最後のスピーカー、ディプティ、バターナーガーに登壇してもらいたいと思います。ディプティは FOE インターナショナルの気候正義エネルギープログラムの国際プログラムコーディネーターでもあり、COP では FOE のメンバーをリードする存在でもありました。FOE グループはですね、もちろん気候変動解決、気候正義のためには、人権の側面が重要であると常に訴えていると思います。そういう意味で非常にチャレンジの大きな COP だったんですが、その点もですね、もう少し詳しく聞けるといいかなと思います。では、ディプティお願いします。
Thank you, Ayumi. Thank you to the interpreters. You make our conversations possible. Language justice is a very important part of our work. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who's here today. And thank you to my fellow panelists. I managed to catch most of what Wale said and all of what Barish said. And those are really, really important points. Thank you for that. And somebody give me a time check in the chat if I'm going over, and also let me know if I'm going too fast. So, you know, our framing for climate justice is very, very clear. We are talking about why do we talk about climate justice? Because climate change is an inherently unjust phenomena, because it is affecting most those who did the least to create it. So when we do our work, we bring this perspective very, very strongly that, hey, whoever did the mess needs to clean it up. It's really as simple as that. When we do some work in our homes, we have the same principle. If you made a mess, you need to clean it up. That's the type of accountability and responsibility we need to be talking about, that we have a shared responsibility for this planet that we are on. This is our only home. So the countries and the populations that used fossil fuels to build up their economies and societies, which is great, you know, the sort of resources available to people in the global north, the sort of the energy that's available, the rights that are available, the conveniences that are available, the rights that have been won by people in the global north, you know, the sort of the labor rates and things like that. That is good. That is how we should be thinking about human dignity, but it's come at a cost, right? And that's what we really need to be really clear about, that because of 500 years of colonialism and slavery and genocide, we are where we are today. And we say this to our government as well. When the Mozambique government behaves like, oh, we can do the same thing that Portugal did to Mozambique, we can do the same thing that the global north did, you know what we say to them? They stood on Africa's back and on Asia's back and on Latin America's back to build the societies that they built today. Whose back are you planning to stand on? It's really as simple as that. Who are you willing to sacrifice and throw their lives away to do the same thing that the global north did? So we are very, very clear that our governments, our countries, all of us need to go down a different pathway, right? We need to have a pathway that puts people and planet at the center. We need to go down a development path that understands that we are really, really deeply connected to the earth and that our lives are not possible without that. You know, without the right to a healthy environment, right to life means nothing. So we come to this work from this very clear position of understanding how did things become so bad? Where, you know, what is happening today, the situation that Barish was talking about, the sort of impacts that have happened in Bangladesh, Pakistan, here in Mozambique, in Nigeria, across the world, including in the global north now. We've had fatal floods in Germany, wildfires in California, Australia. We have our colleagues from Australia on the call as well here. The impacts that are happening are not out of context. And scientists and activists have been telling us for a really long time that this is coming, this is going to happen, this is not right, this is not just. So now we really need to be centering those voices. We need to be really focusing on those frontline, fence line communities that are facing the brunt of it on their back. And I think that's really important in our work going forward. Who do we listen to? As Barish said, and Wale also said, you know, when you go to the COP, it's like a trade show now. We have a small area that we gather, our people, our progressive civil society. The rest of the space is just filled up with carbon traders and companies and countries trying to greenwash themselves. So we need to use, as Wale said so beautifully, we need to use all arenas of struggle, and we need to strengthen some of those arenas. That's the thing that we need to be doing. We need to be strengthening Global South voices. We need to be centering voices of people of color across the world. We need to be centering those who suffered the most and who will suffer the most. Because if you talk to someone who's going to suffer because of a decision, then you know what decision to really take, right? That's the very heart of centering human rights. Talking about this issue of human rights that Ayumi asked me to speak about, and Barish, of course, already spoke about it. And I totally agree. The beauty of what we saw at this COP in Sharm el-Sheikh was that the climate justice community really stepped up and understood that we were in Egypt and that there were serious human rights issues happening in Egypt, and that we needed to learn from people there about their context and then understand what lessons that we can apply to our different contexts as well. And I think we stood in solidarity with them, and solidarity is a really important value that I feel strongly we need to bring into our work. So we feel like my struggle is your struggle and your struggle is my struggle. So we find ways, because we need to link up struggles for people to see that they are not alone. So one of the things that, for example, we did in the Africa People's Counter COP, this was before the COP, we held an event, the Africa Climate Justice Collective, which Friends of the Earth Africa is a part of. We did an event called the Africa People's Counter COP, and there were communities affected by coal, gas, oil, land grabbing, different threats that communities were facing across the continent, getting together in their communities and organizing themselves, but linking up to others across the continent. So the beauty of that, and it needs to be done even bigger and better in the coming years, because we need to strengthen other arenas of struggle as well. The ability to connect my struggle to someone else and to know I'm not alone. Sometimes people feel like, oh, there must be something wrong with me and my community. That's why we are facing this attack. That's why, you know, this coal mine is coming to our community. Maybe we should just accept it. We are alone. We don't know why this is happening. You know, that gets completely turned around. That feeling of helplessness needs to just be taken away to say you are not alone. You know, if that's one thing that we can do, is to connect communities across the world who are fighting against similar countries, you know, financiers from different countries, fighting against similar companies or fighting the same fights, to be able to connect and strengthen people. Because ultimately what is happening is about power. Where the power sits is with the transnational corporations right now. Where the power sits is with the elite right now, because we know that there's a massive inequality crisis that is happening at the same time as the climate crisis, right? The richest 5% of people on the planet are responsible for 35% of carbon emissions between 1990 and 2015. These are the numbers. So we know where the power is sitting. We know where the driving factor is for everything that's happening, where the decisions are being taken. And that's what we need to, you know, one of the really important things that Friends of the Earth International does is to talk about disrupting the power relations, because we need to do that. We're not going to stop the climate crisis by itself in isolation if we don't deal with gender justice, if we don't deal with class justice, if we don't deal with racial justice. And then what Barish and Wale were talking about already, there is no climate justice without civic space. There is no climate justice without human rights. These are the things that we have now realized being in the context of the COP in Egypt. And as Barish already started to say, next year, with the COP in a place like the United Arab Emirates, we need to be talking about migrant justice. There is no climate justice without migrant justice, because this conversation is already happening right now with the World Cup in Qatar. And I am not following the World Cup. I do not support FIFA. It's an extremely corrupt body, but the conversation is happening because of the COP, because of the World Cup in Qatar. This conversation is happening about who are the people that built those stadiums and what happened to their lives and what happened to their communities. And this is the important thing. Whatever comes before us, you know, the governments and those in power will always co-opt our words. So if you look at the Egyptian government made a 2-minute video after the COP, and they're sort of celebrating, oh, the COP went so well, this is everything that happened. And it's a bit shocking that some of our people are in that video. and some of our protests and the actions and our banners that we made are in that video. Why? Because they are using us to say, look, we had so many protests, we had so much beautiful banners, all the beauty and love that we bring to our work and the solidarity. They're going to take it, they're going to take a piece of that and they use it to fulfill their interests. And that is why we need to be really aware of that. We need to be aware what our presence is being used for. We need to challenge ourselves to think about, we need to use all arenas of struggle, but what are the arenas that we need to strengthen? What are the other arenas of work that we need to be strengthening so that we are doing the work that's more important, and so that we are doing the main thing that we should be doing, which is dismantle the current power relations and create power relations that bring justice for everybody, right? That is our aim. The work of Friends of the Earth International is so much about fighting dirty energy, but also talking about what is the energy system that we want to see in the world. What are the principles for the new energy system? So we don't just say, oh, all of the energy that is being produced right now from dirty energy, we just need to switch it and we need to get it from clean energy. No. We need to talk about energy efficiency. We need to be talking about reducing consumption in the global north. We need to be talking about prioritizing renewable energy for people who have never had energy at all. People who the current system never ever even thought about, so that we bring justice into every element of our work. And the other really big piece that Friends of the Earth International is working on is fighting false solutions. And that what does it mean? What is false solutions? So the dirty energy companies are so profitable from their dirty energy, from their business of coal, oil, and gas, that they do not want to give that up. So they're finding every little way to try and undermine their having to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And they say, oh, don't worry, we can offset our emissions. So they're using carbon markets and carbon offsets, pretending like that is actually going to solve the climate crisis. But we know that it's not going to solve the climate crisis, because it doesn't stop emissions, right? It's pretending to offset their emissions, but it's not going to do it. And the real trick is that they want to have a financialization and commodification of nature. What they want to do is to have access, to grab, to control lands and forests that are currently in the hands of communities who are using those resources to keep their communities alive. So fighting against false solutions is something that is going to be really critical in the next year. And this is how we center human rights in all of our work. So of course, we do talk about, on the big picture, no climate justice without human rights, meaning if there is shrinking civil society space, like is happening in Mozambique right now. We had 2 days ago was the International Human Rights Day. And in Mozambique, we do not have the right to march on the streets without permission. And we can ask permission, but they never give permission. But instead, what we can do like a manifestation in one place. So few people were able to gather. I wasn't able to be there, but my colleagues from Justiça Ambiental, Friends of the Earth Mozambique, they were there on Saturday, standing in front of the big statue of our first president and talking about human rights, and we're not able to march on the streets, but let us use all avenues that we can to put our message across. So when we say no climate justice with shrinking civil society space, that has a very direct connection to all of our climate justice and energy justice work that we are doing. Why? Because everywhere that fossil fuels are being extracted or being processed, communities are suffering. And those communities' voices are being shut down. That's why we know that fossil fuels often comes with increasing levels of insecurity and conflict and militarization, because the powers that be are trying to squash the voices of those who are fighting against fossil fuels, or squashing the voices of those who are fighting against land grabbing for carbon offsets. So this is what we are seeing. There is a very direct connection between the drivers of climate injustice, the drivers of climate change, the drivers of deforestation, and all of the things that are actually deepening the climate crisis. There is a very deep link between all of that and fighting for human rights and fighting for civic space, meaning the right of assembly, the right of association, the right for people to gather and organize themselves and do the movement building that is necessary to fight back against all of these threats that are coming. So that's how I see a very direct connection between our climate justice work and fighting against shrinking civil society space everywhere. I don't know how the situation is in Japan right now, but even in a place like the UK, they're fighting against shrinking of civil society space. So this is something, so when we saw what was happening in Egypt, we were trying to be in solidarity with the people in Egypt, but also realizing this is a bigger context. This shrinking civil society space is happening everywhere in all of our countries. And how do we fight back at that? How do we maintain our right to say no? Our right to say no to dirty and harmful projects, our right to say no to, you know, infrastructure projects or anything that is taking away people's ability to survive. Because when you're talking about Africa, when you're talking about Mozambique, 70% of our people are subsistence farmers. People are just, because of so many years of colonialism and slavery and genocide, and the way that our development is happening, you know, our country's human development is so low. Our people are really struggling to survive. So what can we do to strengthen their ability to be able to survive and fight back? Is to have the civic space, right? To be able to have the space to protest and to say no. So right now in Mozambique, we have a draft law which is trying to shut down the civic space because they are putting a lot of restrictions on NGOs. And we don't even know if our NGOs are going to survive with the type of pushback that's coming. So we need to get together. We need to be able to see that the same thing is happening everywhere in the world. And we need to be able to connect that. Like the shrinking civil society space is also very directly related to political crises that are happening across the world. It's not just the climate crisis that we're facing. It's also the inequality crisis, also the biodiversity crisis, also political crises. What is happening with so many countries, especially in Europe, now electing right-wing governments. It's so horrifying and it's so shocking because that is shrinking the civic space even more and is you know, taking power. If we talk about power, instead of dismantling power relations, the move to the right is about cementing existing power relations, is about holding power within a very small group based on patriarchy, based on white supremacy, like globally. These are the trends that we are seeing, and it's going to lead to more classism, more racism, and more sexism. And that's why we need to link up the work that we are doing, from climate justice to shrinking civil society space to those who are fighting for healthier democracies all over the world, to those, my colleagues from the Gender Justice Dismantling Patriarchy Working Group of Friends of the Earth International are also on the call here. The work that needs to be done to link in the anti-patriarchy work with the climate justice work. So I think all of these connections are really, really important. And of course, there's the direct connections that we should be making across our countries. So like one example, when I was last time in Japan, just before the pandemic started, with Ayumi and others, we went to talk to JICA and JBIC, because they're the ones who are funding Mozambique gas project. So to be able to go there and directly look at them and say, you should not be doing this, you should not be funding this, and this is why, they still went ahead with it. And we denounced them when we were together at the COP, but this is how we need to be building our global relationship, so that we have a very clear understanding. When you're looking at things from a height, you can see the connections much more easily. And that's the work that we need to be doing going forward, is to do the movement building, to connect up our people, and to come with the right value system, right? To come with a value system of solidarity, to come with a value system of, we talk about energy efficiency, but there's also energy sufficiency, that each person should have enough energy to lead a life of dignity. What is happening right now, some people have too much, abusing energy, and some people have nothing at all. 600 million people in Africa do not have access to electricity. So it's an injustice on both sides, right? We need to be talking about using and appreciating the resources that this planet has given us to be able to survive, and then to use it in a way that is living within ecological limits. That these are the two really important pillars, I think, of our work, is people and planet, right? That everything that we do, we need to live within ecological limits. We need to, forget about Mars. This is the planet, this is our home. And we need to be able to protect our ability and everyone's ability to live on this planet. And the second thing is about people, right? This is really about every single human being should have the right to have the right to a healthy environment, should be able to live a dignified life. That is what we are fighting for, people and planet. And that's what's important for us going forward. Thank you so much. I'll stop there.
ディプティありがとうございました。ディプティの話にもですね、また大変重要なテーマ、たくさん、出てきました。3人ともやはり3人のスピーカーもですね、この COP の場所というのが、企業、がたくさん来るような場所になってしまっていると。でも私たちは誰の声を聞くのか、そういったことが本当に重要な視点になるんじゃないかなと思います。また、ディプティから False Solutions、誤った対策という話が出てきました。これについても後半の質疑応答で聞きたいなと思ってたところなんですが、そういった企業がですね、COP の場に来たり、また各国でですね、解決策と称して、全く解決策にならない、むしろ、社会や気候に悪影響をもたらすような事業を推進している、そういった側面も指摘してもらいました。市民社会のスペースの縮小というのも本当に深刻な事態だと思います。日本の事例、皆さんも何か思い当たることがあるかもしれませんけれども、例えば今、気候変動対策、ということで日本政府がグリーントランスフォーメーションと言っていますけれども、中身は原発推進であり、全く排出を減らすとか気候変動対策の中身にはなっていないと。だけれどもタイトルにグリーンとつけて、まさしくグリーンウォッシュですよね。そういったことが進んでいる。しかし議論は、一部の与党のメンバーですとか、 官僚の、で行われていて、市民に対するヒアリングですとか情報公開、本当に限られているような、状況でそういった議論も進んでいるというのも、一つ市民社会の縮小や、市民参加という点で日本でも、指摘していかなくちゃいけないことなのかなと思います。3人のスピーカー本当にありがとうございました。ぜひ皆さんの声も、聞きたいなと。
Nice seeing you, Dipti. We met and made interview at Finance Action on 9th November. You also talked about JICA and JBIC, which are Japanese corporation destroying the environment. So what do you want Japanese citizens to do so that we can stop dirty projects in Global South?
ありがとうございます。ディプティどうでしょう。
Thank you. Good to see you again. It's a very important question and a very big question. I think that we need all of the people of Japan to be aware of what the government is doing, what the corporations are doing in the name of the Japanese people, right? Like with the taxpayers' money. So I think that it's very important to inform people. And again, for me, it goes back to the connection. So, and I think this is something that, for example, Friends of the Earth Japan, FOE Japan is already very good at doing, is linking up where Japanese financiers are causing havoc and causing injustice in other places by financing projects, whether it's in Vietnam or whether it's in Indonesia or whether it's in Mozambique. And this is the work that we need to keep doing, is to hold Japanese government and Japanese corporations, including Mitsui and companies like that, right? Not just the financiers and the banks, but also the companies who are involved in providing the technical part to, for example, Mozambique Gas. Mitsui is involved as well. So we need to have information to be very, very clear what is the impact that our country, our companies, our taxpayer money is having on other countries. And then to tell their stories, right? To know what is happening in the Mozambique gas case, what is happening in Cirebon power plant in Indonesia, also funded by Japanese money, to find the stories. And Josue is on the call as well, working with the people in Indonesia to stop the Japanese destruction, of advancing fossil fuels in Asia Pacific. So this, I think we need to have the information about what is going on, and then to find ways to get together. I think for me, it goes back to organizing and doing that movement building to be able to lift up the voices. Again, whose voices are we centering? So we really must center the voices of those who are facing this on their bodies, on their communities. Take those stories back to Japan and in the media and with the companies directly say, this is the impact that you're having, and we're not going to let you get away with it, because we see you and we see the destruction that you're wreaking in different places, and we're going to fight back. So I think that's the really important work that is already happening and needs to happen more going forward. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. I want to share the story in Japan so that many people are aware of our responsibility. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございました。他の方も質問やコメントいかがですか？質問が、一つ日本語で来ているので、読み上げます。貴重な機会をいただきありがとうございました。質問があります。戦争が最も環境に被害を与えるものと考えます。ウクライナ情勢や軍事化について登壇者の皆様のご意見をお伺いしたいということなんですが、3名の方いかがでしょう？ディプティかワリーか、バリーシュ、この点についてどうでしょうか？
Okay, I'll start before the others come in. Like you said, war is not, it's not something anybody prays or wishes to experience. For people in Nigeria who experienced the civil war in the late 50s and early 60s, they will always tell you that nobody who saw that war should wish that any country should go to war. And okay, I'm sorry about that. So the issue of war, like we also saw during the COP, there was an action against the militarization. It was said in that space that the amount of money used for warfare, if it is channeled into this climate crisis, will be out of it by now. It cost about $2 trillion to provide or make the ammunitions used for warfare. So there's no way that we would think that the warfare in Ukraine, being the invasion from Russia, would profit the people. Secondly, Ukraine right now is being helped by different countries around the world, and some of these countries are profit-driven. After the war, the loans that were given to Ukraine in form of ammunition and the likes are going to be demanded for. Where will they get the money to pay back? It's going to lead Ukraine into further poverty. So there's no way that the war will profit anybody in the long run. Even Russia spending their money on ammunition, trying to take over, there's no way. And it's going to further cause more climate crisis for the people of Ukraine, for the people of the world, if nothing is done to stop it. So just to add to what Deepti also said about what you guys can do in Japan, it's a very good thing. One thing I have realized is that there's a power in visuals, there's power in stories. The stories from the COP that you heard, share it with the people in Japan, because not everybody in Japan is willing to travel somewhere else. Some people just don't like to travel, and there's nothing you will do to make them travel. Some people like to travel and explore the world, but some won't. So for those who are in Japan, who don't wish to travel, who just want to be in Japan, it is good to share these stories with them so they can have a foretaste of what people are experiencing because of the financing happening from the Japanese government or Japanese companies elsewhere in the world. I believe if they begin to see it, taxpayers who fund these companies or the government will begin to make the demand that the government stops funding this kind of evil acts across the world. So I think it's something that for every opportunity we have comrades everywhere in the world. That is why Friends of the Earth is there. In over 73 countries across the world. We can connect with them, get people's stories, their visuals, the impact, and put them out there. Let the people see the impact. And I believe when they see, they say seeing is believing. When people see it, they can take more action. When you see like what Japan is already doing, solidarity, when you see tweets, you see posts on different media websites, share it to these people. So when people begin to see these things, they see the impact, they're willing to take action. It's working in Uganda already because there's a pipeline they're trying to connect from Africa straight to Europe. But Uganda has been able to stop over 20 financiers financing that project because of the stories they have pushed forward with the help of companies across the world to the companies in their nation. And those people who were funding this project, many of them have said they will no longer fund it. So unity is united, we can make things happen. Together we can make things happen. And I believe strongly, like I said, in solidarity. The change we seek for will happen as we keep fighting together. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。先ほどの戦争との関連の質問について、ディプティやバリー氏は何か追加ありますか？
Yeah, I would like to add one thing. I think we, just as human beings, I think we have to, be against war and condemn the senseless loss of life and that war brings. But I think when it comes to climate, we also have to have that lens, because right now, this is a fact. The US military, the largest military in the world, is one of the largest carbon emitters in the world, and their emissions are unchecked. the amount of money that has been spent in providing Ukraine military aid is in the hundreds of billions, maybe a trillion. I don't really know the number, but this is at the same time when the Western countries who are giving that aid cannot and has not been able to over the last 10 years provide the 100 billion that they promised in climate finance. So I think that shows you something about the priorities. And I think the thing is that war is not only obviously the loss of human life, but it's also the loss of human rights. Our colleagues in Russia during the COP, when we met them, told us about the hardships that they are facing in Russia, which is, an autocratic state. The laws that are stifling dissent, the laws that are suppressing their speech, and how they are being harassed and intimidated and surveilled, and for just being activists. So I think, we have to resist the militarism. We have to resist the symptoms of militarism as well as the militarism. We have to identify the things that lead towards that before they can start that process of going towards it. I think that's something across the world. It's not just Ukraine. Ukraine is obviously in the spotlight because it's in Europe, and Europe gets much more of the spotlight, but there are wars all over the world right now. There are wars in Ethiopia, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo that we don't talk about, but those are just as devastating. It is causing similar amount of loss of nature, loss of environment, loss of people, loss of culture, and these are things that we have to try and avoid. For example, I know in Japan a few years ago there was this debate about the Article 7, was it, I think, or Article 9, whatever the number article it is, and to create the standing army again. And the thing is that that's obviously a decision for the Japanese people, but there are certain elements of that debate which lead towards militarism in society. And I think it's important to identify those things and make sure that whatever is happening is not going to lead down that road.
Thank you, Barish. Barish, ありがとうございます。これらの点も本当に重要な点だと思います。50どうですか？
I totally agree with what Wale and Barish have said. To target the military and military emissions is a really critical part of the climate justice work that we are doing, but also, as they both said, in understanding how dehumanizing war and conflict is for everybody involved, not just the perpetrators, not just those on whom the war is happening, but also what is happening back home to the people in the country where the war is originating from, like what we see with shrinking civil society space and damage to human rights in Russia. So the other thing that we're writing, and my colleague is writing an article in Mozambique, and we found out that I just want to tell you about this. Sorry, we're looking at the links between climate change and food security and conflict. And 60% of the people who are food insecure right now in the world live in countries where there are conflicts. So as climate change becomes worse, food security is going to be affected even more, because one of the climate impacts, of course, increasing floods, increasing droughts, and agriculture starts to fail. So we need to stop the climate crisis, because people's ability to grow food on their piece of land is going to reduce. And we know that there's a direct connection between food insecurity and environmental impacts and conflict. And we know that fossil fuels have a direct impact with increasing conflict and warfare. So I think this is such an important work that we need to be doing, making these connections going forward. And of course, I know that FOE Japan, for example, is also talking about the US military base in Okinawa and the problems that come with that. And gendered violence has a link to climate and conflict, as Sam is saying in the chat. So we need to be able to make all these linkages and fight back on all of these injustices. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dipti. ありがとうございます。質問をくださった方もありがとうございます。終了の時間が、近づいているんですけれども、質問本当にありがとうございました。ぜひ今日ですね、一番こう印象に残ったこととか、単語でも何でもいいので、ぜひチャットにですね、日本語でも英語でもいいので、印象に残ったことをぜひ書いていただけるとありがたいかなと思います。で、その間にですね、今日、登壇してくれた、ワリーシュ・ディプティ、そして今日通訳を、してくださった森さんとみちさんに、ひとまずここで、一旦お礼を言いたいと思います。皆さん今日は本当にありがとうございました。ありがとうございました。ぜひですね、チャットにですね、何かこう心に残った言葉とか書いてもらえると嬉しいんですけれども、今日本当にさまざまな、COP という COP27 に、での、学びとかチャレンジとかの、シェアの機会ではあったんですが、ミリタリズムですとか、市民社会の縮小、そういった、キーワードがたくさん出てきました。で、私個人的にとても勇気づけられて、かつ今後の活動に重要かなと思ったのは、連帯するということかなと思います。影響を受けている人も、気候正義のために戦っている人も、やはりこうつながって声を大きくしていくということを伝えていくということを、一緒に立ち上がるということを、本当に今回の COP でもその重要性について感じました。皆様は何が一番心に残られたでしょうか。ぜひ今後もですね、FOE ジャパン FOE のメンバーと一緒にクライメートジャスティスのためにいろいろ活動できたらいいなと思います。はい、皆さんチャットに書き込んでくださってありがとうございます。はい、バリーシュから最後のコメントもありますね。JICA がですね、バングラデシュの、パワー、電力、マスタープランを作ろうとしていると。それもまた対策に満ちていると。これについても、日本の、私たちも、一緒に立ち上がって、声を上げていかないといけないなと思います。しばらく開けておきますので、ぜひコメント、入れてくれたらと思います。はい、ありがとうございます。じゃあ一旦ここで終わりたいと思います。皆さん本当に参加してくださった方もありがとうございました。これから夜の方は良い夜を、今まだお昼の方はぜひ良い一日を過ごしてください。ありがとうございました。